The opinions and statements made by the guests of the Success in Practice podcast are their own, and I do not endorse or accept responsibility for their positions. Any information given by myself or the guests is educational in intention and not to be taken as medical advice. If you choose to act on the content involved in the podcast, you do so at your own risk. Okay, everyone, welcome to the Success in Practice podcast. Today, I'm joined by Kate Tallarida. Have I said that correctly, Kate?
Yes. Yep.
Great. Kate currently works as an osteopath in Wollongong, New South Wales, just south of Sydney. She's been practicing since 2005 after graduating from the University of Western Sydney's Osteopathy program. Kate sees many conditions that would describe her as a generalist. She has a keen interest in visceral, biodynamic, and myofascial work, especially in applying it to the lifespan of the patient. She has a 9-year-old son and enjoys relaxing with hiking, surfing, and yoga. Kate has diversified into the online space, which is something I'm particularly interested in, so I'll discuss that with her. And she uses osteopathy to help women free themselves of neck and back pain. She's previously volunteered on missions to Nepal and Peru and hopes that going online can free her up from table work to do more volunteer work and some passion projects. Kate, thank you so much for being on the podcast and welcome.
Thank you, Sammy, for having me.
I know it's late, so I really appreciate you taking the time out. I think today I'd like to explore your particular progression as a clinician. You finished osteopathy at UWS in 2005, 2 years after I graduated, and I'm really interested in your progression as a clinician, and I think we'll get a lot of value out of that for the listeners. I'd like to chat about your early days as a young practitioner and some of the challenges that you faced and what you did to overcome them, and how you kind of navigated that whole time of your career. I think I'd like to discuss some of the technical aspects of your work and developments there as well. A lot of the techniques that you've been using and a lot of the courses that you've attended and how you've developed that. You've moved into the online space, and that's exciting and challenging. And that would interest people out there and what you're doing with that, because I think there's a brave new world out there with that kind of thing. And finally, I just want to get your thoughts on the current landscape of osteopathy and the landscape of osteopathy throughout your journey, like how you've seen it progress as you've progressed, and what you see as some of the challenges and opportunities ahead of us. So that's what I'd like to explore today with you. Is there anything that you want to chat about that I might have missed out, or you want to kind of add on to that?
That sounds great. Yeah.
All right, so let's get into it. Before we kind of get into the technical or the clinical side of things, you grew up with immigrant Italian parents, and I'm a massive fan of sushi mango. And so I'm imagining something going along those lines. Um, how did that shape you? You know, is that true? You know, is that funny to you?
Sushi mango, I don't actually really. They are kind of quite funny, but they swear a bit too much for me.
Right.
I don't know if you've heard of the comedian Joe Avati.
Yes, I have. I think Joe's very funny.
He is on point. I mean, he could have been in my house when I was growing up. Seriously, the stuff that he talks about, I think it's classic.
Right. So tell us. I mean, being raised by immigrant parents.
Yeah.
You know, I'm an immigrant myself, and I was raised by immigrant parents. But
Okay.
how did that shape you? You know, I have my experience. Share with us your experience. How did that shape you growing up as a human? Number one, but also in your professional life, have things kind of transferred over to your professional life?
I think they have. You know, just in my personal life, I would just say. So my parents were both children when they moved to Australia with their families. So they still had that sort of, you know, growing up in Australia, but still being very Italian. So all those things are still, you know, making salami in the winter and the sauce at the end, you know, in summer, that was us. We still did that. And a lot of growing up, things were really very community based, very family based. Weekends you'd be visiting, family friends from, other Italian families, or spending a lot of time with cousins, or parents' cousins, or a lot of visits. And then
Did you get the lecture in the car when you were on your way there not to accept anything?
Oh, you weren't allowed. I know.
You weren't allowed, right?
You're thirsty, like you just need a drink, right?
But
And
they
they're
gave
trying to
me
force
the
feed you
cookies.
these biscuits, but you're like, I'm not allowed to eat the biscuits that you're giving me.
And then you get there, and your mum's like, "Well, yeah, it's all right, you can take it." And you don't know if she's playing games with you, or what's going to happen when you get home.
Yeah, so I think that real that community, that community and family connection was really important. We also, well, I guess we did have quite an insular. My brother and I did have quite an insular upbringing as well. So at the time, it felt like really unfair and quite strict and very limited with what we were allowed to do and go out and hang out with friends, or that sort of thing growing up. But at the same time, I guess it was quite, we were quite sheltered. But I guess it did kind of, keep me pretty on the straight and narrow in a lot of ways. We grew up speaking our Southern Italian dialect, our Calabrese dialect, because my grandmother didn't speak English, so we had to speak to her in dialect. So I think I actually think having that ethnic background and even the languages just made us just a bit more broad-minded, even though we did have that kind of insular growing up. We did have, we knew there was more to the world than just what was here. And kind of sometimes you sort of might feel a little bit left out, or feel that you're a bit different to everybody else. But at the same time, it was like almost like we had something else that other people didn't have growing up. So I really appreciated it. And then I think, growing up as an adult and even like in practice now, I just have a lot more appreciation for diversity. And I think it's actually helped my communication style a lot. So clients that come in, you might have a lot of elderly clients that are of different kind of ethnic backgrounds, and those old ethnic ladies that come in, you get it. You look at them and you get it. You're like, you're just like my grandmother. I know what's going on. Even if they can't speak English very well. Just the way you might communicate is you kind of sort of understand some of their culture a little bit. So some of the words that you might use, or you might, say the same thing a few different ways just to make sure that they're understanding. And
you put on the accent.
I don't really put on that. Actually, sometimes I do. But I think it just gives you that little bit of an extra edge when you're kind of just picking up some of those cultural cues, or what might be going on for the person as a whole. You sort of understand them. If, a lot of these ladies can be very stoic. They can be very, how would you describe it? Very.
Well, you're not giving them 5 exercises to do at home in the one go.
No, you're not. But you're also kind of getting. They've got that very rigid. Those you get the idea of what their mental constructs are like. That their world has to be a certain way. They're not going to think outside certain boxes. If you tell an Italian lady that you've got to stop eating wheat, well, good luck.
Or you got to change your footwear. Get them to change their footwear.
Yeah. But they've got that very much. You just got to suck it up, put up with it, soldier on. Don't complain. Just you don't do anything to change. You just have to deal with things.
Yeah, you got to work with them. So like trying to get them to not clean 8 hours for the whole day. Maybe do like a couple of bedrooms today, another 2 bedrooms tomorrow, because they all live in 8-bedroom homes, right?
Well, yeah, right.
And then
you don't need to wash the concrete. You don't need to water the concrete. But but I guess you kind of understand what their limitations are, what their mindset's like, so you can approach them from that that kind of angle. What to ask of them or not to ask of them.
Yeah. There's empathy there.
Clearly. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
All right. So you decided to do osteopathy at UWS. You went straight in. Did you go straight in from high school?
I took a year off after high school, so I wasn't really sure exactly what I wanted to do. I did have an idea of something kind of health sciencey. I knew I didn't want to be in an office. I knew I didn't want to be a public servant like my mum. So, um,
So
from
what made you do osteopathy as opposed to, like, physiotherapy, for example, or
that was
acupuncture or
yeah, that's an
something?
interesting question. Growing up, I actually thought of doing physiotherapy a couple of times. I was a gymnast and I had a couple of injuries and seen physios, and I thought, oh, this is pretty cool. But then I decided that physio was too hard to get into because I needed a really high marks outside of high school. And I was like, that's not happening. I'm not getting a 98 UAI. Took a year off out of school after school, and I'd, gotten into a few sports science kind of courses and deferred for a year. And I was literally flicking through one of those old UAC guides, the university guides that have got all the different courses in them.
Yep.
And came across this course with a strange name. And I thought, what's this? What's this osteopathy? So I looked up chiropractic. I was like, nah. Looked up physio. I'd already written physio off. And we started kind of looking up osteopathy, and it just caught my interest. And I think it was just one of those like gut feelings. And the more I looked into it and the more I found out about it, the more I liked the ideas and the philosophy and that way of thinking behind it. It just kind of seemed to be a little bit different. And I think, growing up maybe with that different cultural background and always just having a bit of an interest in things that were not quite mainstream, but not too out there. I think osteopathy was just a little bit to the side of the mainstream, but still kind of there. It just really really appealed to me. And the more I looked into it, the more it just sort of felt like, yeah, this really interests me. This is really a lot of what I do want to do and not much of what I don't want to do. So I just kind of just went with that gut feeling, I guess, those instincts.
Well, you mentioned the thought process there and how that kind of caught your attention. So I'm going to push on that a little bit later in some of the questions. We'll discuss that. You went to UWS. Tell us about your time at UWS. How do you feel about that experience, University of Western Sydney, for people that may not be from that era or that part of Australia? So the osteopathy program at University of Western Sydney, I think, got shut down in 2010. I think, from memory. I could be wrong. But somewhere around there.
Yeah.
How did you feel about that experience? And now that you can reflect back as a practitioner as well,
Yeah.
can you tell us a bit about that?
I mean, obviously don't have anything to compare it to. It was my only experience at uni. I just, the course was definitely intense. And I remember, I lived on campus for the first couple of years, and a lot of the other courses that people were doing just seemed to be a bit more of a bludge. So it was definitely very intense. I thought, I guess I felt like it was quite good. My year group did have a lot of people who were mature age students who'd done courses, been to uni elsewhere. So they had different experiences to compare it to. And probably thought their other experiences were probably more professional than the osteo course that we had. In terms of what we learnt, I thought, it seemed to be quite well, I felt like we learned what we needed to learn. That we, in terms of academic wise, we had it there. And then with the osteopathy subjects, we were hands on from day one, which was great because it takes a while to build up those palpatory skills. And
yeah, sure.
We had quite a lot of, I guess, what probably made the course unique was we didn't have a lot of academics teaching. We had a lot of osteopaths teaching. So I don't know if that was probably the same for you. A lot of our lecturers and teachers were actually, osteopaths who'd been practicing for a while. They weren't necessarily educators, like
Well,
academics.
yeah, it didn't make
Which
them any less smarter. I think,
no, and I think that actually, when you get to student clinic and those kind of things, you're learning subjects that are very clinical, very hands-on. To have those practitioners teaching us that were actually, quite current in practice, that they were still working hands-on, could actually still pass on that knowledge to us.
Yeah, look, my view on that is that when you have experienced practitioners that are really mentoring you, that's what they're doing. I mean, I hadn't had any exposure to any osteopaths really, and so the first 2 or 3 years of your university studies, you're really not only being taught by clinicians, but they're really shaping your thoughts.
Yeah,
And
absolutely.
and then what happens is that when you get into when you start practicing, you end up standing on their shoulders because you don't have any experience, but all you have is their experience of actually being successful. And the research won't give you that. The research is just going to tell you, more study, more research is required in this field or something, or research is not definitive. It doesn't say, we get people better. We can have this outcome. As you know, patients are really interested in the outcome when they come to see us. And
Yeah.
I think what those experienced practitioners offered was they offered some shoulders to stand on.
Yeah.
We needed, and that's where you derive your confidence from, is from osteopaths who practice osteopathy.
Yeah. And yeah, I 100% agree with that. And that holistic thinking, the thought processes, the why we're doing what we're doing, all that philosophy and even the art behind that we have in there, that finesse that you develop after a while. They're the sort of things that you don't learn from lectures. You can't learn from reading paper. That's all passed down experience. So, I had quite a few. I think we were lucky that we had quite a diverse range of um, osteopaths in the way they practice it as well. So um, we had some practitioners who were very, hands-on, musculoskeletal, manipulative, and then we had some really great experienced practitioners who practiced a lot of indirect stuff and everything in between. So we were kind of exposed to that really full scope of osteopathy. And I really think there's a bit of a difference between, being a musculoskeletal therapist, which osteopathy seems to be reducing more to this just, very small musculoskeletal model, as opposed to osteopathic medicine, where you're treating the person as a whole. You can influence other health conditions in the body. You're working with living tissue and the whole person, rather than a couple of different joints and wiggling that joint or stretching that little bit of muscle and not really putting the whole picture together. So we really got that idea that we're working with something that's more than just a bag of bones.
Well, at the very least, until you go off into the big bad world and do your own courses and your own further development, at the very least, that will get you through your, the first crucial 5 years of practice.
Yeah.
And
I think that experience just allows you, it sort of let us, at the very least, it let us knew that there was more out there.
Yeah. Well, let's talk about that. Your first 5 years in practice, you graduated, and then obviously your first 3 to 5 years, for example, in practice. What were they like? What were you doing? Where were you practicing? Tell us about your mindset and how you felt, confidence. How was all that for you?
Going back a while now, isn't it? So the first couple of years, I ended up working with one of our clinicians from has a practice down in Wollongong. So I started working with them for the first year. So they had a pretty busy practice. So it was good getting the hands on in straight away, and just knowing that you had people around that you could ask questions. And people that I was already comfortable with. Cameron had been a clinician of mine, so if I had any questions, you could just, ask. But it was definitely, I think, probably the first couple of months, it was definitely pretty scary. You're just going like, geez, I hope, gosh, I hope that treatment worked kind of thing. And, you know, you'd see results, but I think there was definitely a massive learning curve in terms of, when do I put this patient back in again?
Yeah.
How often do I need to see this person?
Mm.
What do I do once I get to, you know, I come back next week? The symptoms are getting better. What do you do with them once you get to that point where you've seen them a week ago, they come back this time, they haven't had any problems the last week, and you're like,
Do I keep treating them? What do I
what
do?
do I do now?
Yeah.
That kind of whole treatment plan. And I think that was probably the main gap, you know, that treatment protocol of how often do you see them? When do you space them out? What do you do once they're starting to get better? That kind of thing. I think in terms of, you know, the actual treatment, like the techniques, I think, you know, we had enough when we finished uni, I had enough techniques to be able to treat someone and feel like, yeah, that made a change. That was good. Yeah, I think doing a lot of soft tissue work definitely took its toll on my arms in the first year or so. I was like, geez.
You definitely have to condition up to it, don't you?
You do. And I remember the first couple of weeks, so I was exhausted. So I
Yeah.
think the practice owners took a little bit of time off just to help give me a leg up, and just jumping straight in and treating sort of 10 or 12 clients a day was absolutely exhausting.
It's mentally exhausting too. That's
Yeah, it is, but it was still quite, you know, it was still good experience just to get in there and just get a little bit of confidence up. But there was always for me that bit of like, wonder what the patient thinks of,
yeah.
did I do a good enough job, sort of thing.
So let me ask you about that. Let me segue
Yeah.
a little bit. When you did have a patient that didn't respond, for example, that they thought that you weren't getting the result for them, how did that affect you emotionally in the early years?
Um, yeah, probably that probably shakes your confidence. It can shake your confidence a little bit. You sort of think, you know, did I do something wrong, or did I miss something, or you question yourself rather than, um, you know, maybe it's just something that wasn't going to respond anyway.
Yeah.
You're always kind of thinking like, have I missed something, or have I done something wrong, or have I made it worse, or that kind of thing. So, you know, I guess the first port of call was just to kind of ask one of the other people in the practice, like, what would you do, or what would you do, or where do I go from here?
Yeah. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
All right. So, um, 3 to 5 years in practice, you're working with other osteopaths.
Hmm.
Um, and then after that, you moved to a multidisciplinary clinic where you were pretty much the sole osteopath there. So
Yeah. So
you
one of
can,
the osteopaths they had there left,
yeah.
and I took over from them. Yeah.
And
So
so yeah, when you did that, and you kind of, you didn't have the I mean, not that you can't pick up a phone and call, but it's not the same as kind of being in the same clinic as experienced osteopaths that maybe have 10, 15 years of experience on top of what you've got. You kind of cut the safety net a little bit there. What made you do that, and what made you feel that you were ready to kind of take on that challenge? Hello, everyone. I'd like to take a quick moment to thank everyone for watching and listening to the podcast. If you have received value from this episode, the kindest thing you can do for me is to like, share, follow, and subscribe to the channel on whichever platform that you are listening on. If any of the conversations have resonated with you and you feel that I can help elevate your practice, you can find me at successinpractice.net. That is, the Success in Practice program can be found at successinpractice.net. The Success in Practice program is the signature program that takes a practitioner who may be struggling with retaining patients. They may not be certain about building effective treatment strategies, and they may feel somewhat anxious and doubtful about what they are going to do with a patient, and they are not really accelerating in the real world of private practice. It takes this practitioner and it turns their careers right around to the point where the patients have an effective diagnosis and a real treatment plan that they can take home. Patients are happy to book in multiple sessions with you, and they are confident about your abilities. And more importantly, you now have direction and are confident about your own abilities. The program streamlines how you operate as a practitioner. Guys, you should have been taught this at university, but you weren't. You may have been practicing for the last few years thinking there has to be a better way. There has to be a more effective way of engaging with patients and getting them results. Well, there is. And this is what the program delivers. Go to successinpractice.net and check out the options available to you. See where I can help you easily grow your patient list and finally earn the rewarding income that you deserve. For all the information on how you can reach me personally, check out the show notes. Also in the show notes, you'll find a link to the chat transcripts from these podcasts. These are valuable and a wealth of information. I really hope that you're enjoying the podcast. Guys, leave a comment if there's any questions on this episode. And please, don't forget to like, share, follow, and subscribe to the channel. Now, back to the show.
Well, one of the reasons why I did that was, I'd moved back from interstate, and I'd been working in a practice where I think I had a few days a week, and I needed more work, so I needed to move somewhere else. So I was working in two practices to start with, like a lot of people do to start with, and then it ended up being full-time position at one place. So I just moved there. It was just a kind of a natural progression of following where the work was. But I think in the early years as well, it's, I did move around a few times. So I worked in Wollongong for about a year, moved over to WA for a couple of years, and then came back. So that, that chopping and changing and moving towns is, you're almost starting from scratch every time you move when you're building up a practice as well. So that's kind of, I guess that's one of the downfalls about this profession is if you're doing, something that's very location based, you want to move somewhere else, you got to start, you're starting all over again.
Yeah, it's hard to take your reputation with you.
Yeah, you can't take your reputation with you interstate,
It's a bit easier now. It's a bit easier now being online. I mean, with maybe Google reviews and things like that. But and most people don't build a personal brand. They're building a clinic brand. So that's hard to take with you. But yeah, that would have been a challenge for you. But at least it would have given you some insight. I mean, if you could build something 2 or 3 times in a row, it teaches you what works and what doesn't.
Yeah. I ended up in that practice. I took over from somebody who was there, and I guess, I had a little bit. I'd had a bit of experience behind me by then, and I guess it was just, it was definitely kind of a bit of a confidence. Again, you just kind of had to figure it out yourself, and I think some of that is I guess some of that's good in a way because it really gets you thinking outside of the box. But you've always got someone on the other end of the phone. If they're not there in the clinic, you can just ask, phone a friend, or I'm still 15 years later, we've still got a chat group with some of my really great friends from uni. It's like brains trust. What do you think about this? So.
Look, I think talking to you just now as well. I actually think that goes back to your immigrant background. The sink or swim. That's it. There's no halfway measures. You either make it, you cut the safety net, you sink, or you swim. It's time to either ante up or just pack it in. So obviously you decided to swim, and that's it's very common with successful practitioners, successful business people, successful anything. Lawyers, carpenters, plumbers. I think that's a common trait there. So honestly, I think that goes back to your immigrant upbringing. Just
I hadn't thought of that, but yeah, probably. And I think there's an advantage to working with different types of practitioners as well. So like massage therapists or naturopaths or that kind of thing. It tends to make you a little bit more holistic as well. Realizing that, oh, hang on, something else is going on with this client. You ask the naturopath and it sort of starts to help kind of build this, okay, what's going on physiologically is translating to what you're feeling in the tissues. right, that makes sense, bigger picture.
Yeah.
And then you start to think, okay, so you start to build, okay, well, that's when I need to refer to the naturopath because they need this other, they need support with, something else that's going on, some other condition or some other physiological, like inflammation or hormonal stuff or whatever it might be that we can't work on hands-on as osteopaths. But you start to recognize that, okay, these other things are influencing what's happening in the tissues, sort that out, and then they'll respond better to the osteo treatment too.
Well, let me then ask you a second question on that, seeing as you brought it up.
Sure.
When you have something, obviously that there's a lot of education in what you just said. Working with other modalities and how you kind of picked up that, hey, maybe they need to see the naturopath, or when you speak to naturopath about something that you've seen, they give you their explanation, and a light bulb goes off, and you go, aha, this makes sense. And so if you have a patient that you think, hey, you need to see the naturopath, and then you see them and you make that call, and they go see the naturopath, and they improve. How much authority does that put back onto you? I mean, that's a massive. I think that's a big thing that really gives you a lot of authority. The fact that you're able to say, look, this is not for me to look at. You need to see the naturopath, and then they go and see the naturopath. They get a good result. Anytime they need something to do with what you're doing, they're coming straight back to you. I mean, that's a massive way to build trust
because often
and,
you've
and
picked up
achieve
something
authority.
that's been missed elsewhere. And when you start to pick up things that other therapists have missed, even if it's not you fixing it, you've made the appropriate referral. They're like, oh, that person knows what they're talking about.
Yeah, yeah.
And that gives you that,
That
that gives
authority.
you that authority.
It
builds that trust. That trust. They come back. They'll send you'll get referrals from them as well. So
it tells the patient that you're in it. You're really in it for them, and that's what we talk about when we talk about patient-centered care.
Yeah, and I think patients really appreciate that if you can't fix them, to actually give them a pathway, give them the options. So don't just keep treating them or not send them somewhere. Always give them the next step.
This has been a bit of one of my little not problems, but I guess I have an issue with the whole patient-centered approach. I think we're going way too far and almost ignoring the practitioner. So what I mean by that, I think things need to be patient-centered but practitioner-driven, right? And so people are seeing you for your particular expertise, and you just hit the nail on the head. You've given them a pathway to improve, and you've driven that process. It's not the patient saying to you, hey, this is not working. Do you think maybe I should try X, Y, Z? It's
They don't know they don't always know what they need to try.
And it's you saying, look, I've picked up on this. I think the naturopath can really help you. Go and see the naturopath, and when you're ready, you can come back and see me, and we can work on X, Y, Z. That's practitioner driven, and that's different. That's not just solely patient centered. So I think sometimes we can throw the baby out with the bathwater and trying to have the practitioner on the same level as the patient from a respect point of view, and I get that bit, but from an education and a knowledge point of view, the practitioner, if the practitioner's on the same level as the patient, there's a problem with the practitioner. So I think the practitioner needs to be the one with the knowledge, they need to be the one driving what's going on, And so I just hope that we don't keep going into a pathway where we throw the baby out with the bathwater and just disregard what the practitioner has to say and their care, just to be, patient centered. So yeah, sorry, I just went off on a bit of a.
No, that's great.
Yeah. Okay. So, well, it's good to this is one of the things what I love about these podcasts is that we can kind of go into these little rabbit holes, and I think we get a lot of information for people out there. Look, you have a keen interest in visceral osteopathy and viscera really, and how to treat viscera to bring about changes in somatic dysfunction. And you really you're doing that across the lifespan of the patient. Tell us about. I mean, we know what visceral osteopathy is, but I'm more interested in the thought process. Your thought process when you use the osteopathic principles and the foundations,
Yep.
and then you apply them to systemic diseases that have visceral implications. Tell us about that process in your head.
Right. So I guess I'll just start with, like, I had quite a few gut issues myself, like after I came back from Nepal in particular. And I really started to, once I had some treatment that was actually working on the gut and on the viscera, and I felt how much of a change that had in my body, I just went, I'm going to go and do some of these Baral courses because there's a lot in this. And that, and I can't quote exactly the percentage, but there's a very, very high percentage of musculoskeletal complaints or somatic dysfunction that actually have a visceral component to it. So you're not going to get complete resolution of a lot of stuff unless you look at the visceral component of it. But, I've been finding that, so, I went along to the courses, found them ridiculously effective, and all those thoracics on patients that you could just never budge, just, or you do visceral work on them and the next thing you know, it's all melted under your hands. So I guess with the thought process with that, it probably starts when the patient first comes in and you're taking their history. So when we take their history, we take that, you take the history of the presenting complaint. But when you've got a new patient and we do the systems review, at uni, it just felt like you're ticking off boxes. Yep, done a systems review, don't need to refer them to a doctor. They're not dying of cancer. Great, I can go and treat them.
Yeah.
No red flags. Excellent. All right, I'll just get on with my, rub and crack or whatever you're going to do.
Yeah.
So once you start thinking about the patient holistically and you're thinking, okay, they're more than a bag of bones. There's all these organs going on there that are attached to the musculoskeletal system. There's, the CNS, there's the dura, there's all these other things going on there as well. There's this 3D structure, there's all the fascia, there's all these other layers going on. And someone comes in and there's actually a reason why there's actually so much information in that systems review that now actually becomes relevant to your treatment, not just whether you need to refer them on or not. So someone will come in, they might be talking about how they get this recurrent, mid-thoracic pain. Yep, goes up to my neck. I get the headaches. I can't turn my head. I wake up in the morning sometimes and I've got that acute torticollis. And, I have to turn my whole body when I go to do my head check in the car. So I can't look over my shoulder. I have to turn my whole body around, look out the window. And it comes and goes. They get treatment. It helps for a bit, but it doesn't really quite solve the problem. And then you find out, okay, they've got a bit of IBS or they get reflux or they've got this other stuff, they've got a bit of gut stuff going on, which is quite a lot of people these days. So your systems review, your history is already telling you that there's more going on for this person than just those thoracics or those cervicals. So it really starts, you're building a bigger picture. You're already looking at the patient a bit more holistically. And here this is where I was sort of talking about, we're stepping from that, quite limited musculoskeletal model to, I don't know, for want of a better word, I guess. And then we're now looking at the patient as a whole. We're starting to now look at okay, what else is going on with this client? Where's the cause?
Yeah.
Is the cause these thoracics? Is the cause the neck? Or is the cause actually this visceral dysfunction? This leaky gut or IBS or whatever it might be. So you start looking for the cause.
Yeah, look.
And then you get down to that, you start treating the gut, and the next thing you know, you haven't touched their neck, but they've got at least 50% more range of motion when you retest.
Has there been have you found, not resistance, but I mean, when you discuss it with a patient, do you find that, they're kind of like, oh, really? it's just an acute wry neck that keeps coming back every 3 months.
Well, look, when
how
you
do you?
start joining the dots, you explain to them, they're a little bit like, okay. So I tend to go in there with, some of it's that confidence as well. You sound like you know what they're talking about. They'll buy from you.
Right.
The used car salesman. I mean, we're not used car salesmen. We're very highly qualified practitioners.
Oh, mate, these Italian immigrants, I'm telling you what.
Look, but if you can explain to them in a way that makes sense, and you say, okay, well, this keeps coming back. You've had treatment. It doesn't quite nail it. It keeps coming back. We'll do a little bit of the stuff that's worked for you, but I'm going to do something that's a little bit different as well, because you've only been getting so far. So if we want that extra improvement, if you want a different outcome, you have to try something different. So,
and then you get the result.
They're a little bit more open to that. And then you explain to them, okay, so the gut is basically a hollow muscular tube from your mouth to your tail, and it attaches to all these little bits of the skeleton and the diaphragm and the ribs and the lower back and the pelvis on its way out. And because it's stretchy and muscular, if there's inflammation and irritation there, it can contract just like any of the other muscles, just like your biceps or your hammies might get tight. So it'll tug on whatever it's attached to on those bones, and they go, oh, well, that makes sense. Yeah. Okay. We'll give it a shot. And then they feel the difference in their bodies and they're sold.
Yeah, that was the point that I was going to get to, is the results ultimately are king, right? Like, if you can get the result for the patient, that's what patients are interested in. They really care about the outcome. And I think a lot of younger practitioners get caught up on the process. They think that their process has to be really, really sharp. But, your process can be a little bit rough around the edges. As long as the end result is there for the patient, they'll keep coming back to see you when they need something from you. And that's, you just said it. Once you try it and you get the result, they're sold on it. And that's really important. That's the most important thing for me, is the result. That's the big one. I mean, you could explain to them all day long, and you could make a really great case, but if you treat them for 3 or 4 sessions and nothing changes, it's not gonna.
Yeah. And this is, I think, going back to that, that sort of, well, the whole treatment plan, or the whole treatment plan, I guess, is if you're getting 3 or 4 treatments and nothing's changing, you're missing the mark.
Yeah.
Either there's something going on that really needs to be checked out that's not going to respond to osteopathy at all, or you're completely off the mark with your diagnosis, and you're not getting down to the root of the problem. Either way, you're not getting to the cause of the problem.
Agreed. You've missed something along the way. Yeah. So at what point in your career did you begin to introduce more of the myofascial, indirect, oral, visceral kind of work?
I was always quite interested in that at uni. Like, I had I guess like a lot of the clinicians that were pretty influential for me were some of the ones who were already doing that kind of stuff. So I was already interested in it. And then in my second year out, when I was working over in WA, the practitioners that I was working with over there had actually started doing some of the biodynamics phase courses. So we were all just kind of, swept up in that movement together. And we were all, learning the same approach together. So I continued on with that. And then a couple of years later, I started doing some of the Visceral visceral courses as well. And that's, I think, when I did the visceral courses, I think that's when I started to feel like I was becoming a real osteopath.
Right.
I was practicing osteopathic medicine.
That's like is that like 7 years out, 5, 7 years out, something like that?
Probably more like 3 or 4 years out.
3 or 4 years out, right?
Yeah. So, and I think, with that, it was really just having that open mind.
That's really hard, though, to be in a profession for 3 or 4 years and not feel like an osteopath, right? It's kind of like.
Well, I guess I didn't realize I sort of wasn't until I was.
Yeah. You didn't realize that you weren't until you realized that you weren't. and then
Yeah,
you went and
it
then you
was
went and
funny.
changed.
It's yeah, you just don't realize.
You don't know what
Um,
you don't know.
exactly. And then when you start to get into that other stuff, you're like, oh wow, what was I doing before?
Mm, yeah.
Um, yeah, and I think that's really when I started to really feel like, okay, we're thinking really holistically now. We're thinking, um, you know, what's how all these body systems are fitting together and how they're all influencing each other,
Do you
and
think?
how we can actually influence the patient as a whole and their
Mm.
whole health, not just the physical musculoskeletal conditions.
And so it took some of the maybe the biodynamic and the visceral work to kind of open your mind, I guess, to that dimension of thinking through. But do you think that that's, I mean, the I guess you expanded your toolbox,
Yeah,
but your philosophy didn't really change. I mean, you still applied osteopathic principles, philosophy. It was just another tool that you learned, but that
yeah,
tool gave you maybe some access to different layers of dysfunction. And then
absolutely. Yeah,
right. But
yeah,
the thought process, whether you're a manipulative therapist, whether you're somebody who uses myofascial, I always make the argument that if you're a true osteopathic practitioner could literally work online handing out exercises, and if they know exactly what they're doing and they're prescribing within the framework of osteopathic principles, they will get a result with patients that need, the the I guess the exercises that they need.
yeah,
And so it doesn't really matter what tools you use. A lot of it matters on the actual thought process that you're
yeah.
applying.
The way you think about it. Yeah,
Yeah, yeah. And this is when patients always ask me, what's the difference between osteopathy, chiropractic, and physiotherapy? It invariably comes back to the thought process. That's
yeah,
we just think differently.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
Um,
Absolutely.
Look, moving forward, you mentioned that one of the gaps in your education, especially at university, was business. Business skills,
Yes.
um, and
Yeah.
they were things that you had to really learn for yourself.
Yeah.
Um, how important has that been for you, and how important do you think it is for graduates to learn those skills? Is it something that should be taught at a university level? I mean, I remember you probably remember this. We had one subject that was something like we had to do a business plan. Did you ever do that?
Yeah, yeah.
And that was
Yeah, I
like,
think I did really terribly on that assignment. Yeah.
I've still got it's funny, I actually opened up that business plan like maybe about a year ago. It's still on my old hard drive somewhere. And I'm just looking at it and going, really? This is not how you run a business, like that's got nothing. So do you think that should be taught at a tertiary level, or do you think it should be left for people to kind of go off and do their own thing? There's so much of it out there that you
Yeah.
can learn it, but how important is that to young practitioners wanting to go out on their own?
I think if you're wanting to go out on your own, then yeah, absolutely.
Mm,
Um, it's because if you're not getting people in the door in the first place, you're not getting the experience.
no.
So
No,
how do
volume
you get those
matters.
people? How do you get those people in the door in the first place? You still need to be able to run a business.
Yeah, yeah. And
And
what were some of the challenges for you early on? Hello, everyone. Just a quick break to give you some information on where to best find me. The first place is the private Facebook group called the Successful Practitioner Pathway. I've set up this private group as a place where practitioners can go and get tips and advice on how to best accelerate their practice and improve their clinical practice skills. The second place to find me is at successinpractice.net. That is where the Success in Practice signature program is housed. You can find more information about me and how I can best help you achieve success in your practice. So, the two best places, the private Facebook group, the Successful Practitioner Pathway, and successinpractice.net. I will link to both those places in the show notes. So, for more information, please see the show notes. Now, enjoy and back to the show.
look, I think some of the challenges early on were, um,
We're talking like bookkeeping, and we're talking understanding numbers, having a look at,
yeah, probably
profit
understanding
and
numbers,
loss.
having like systems and protocols, and it was probably I would probably say more because in those first few years I was working in essentially as an associate in other businesses. So it was a lot of really more about, the rebooking side of things and the treatment plans. But you would be working with certain people and certain practices and thinking like, geez, and that's changed so much since we graduated, Sammy. Like,
Yeah.
when we first started, you could just stick your name in the yellow pages and have the biggest ad and be the top of, the first ad in the yellow pages, and you're
Yeah.
fine.
AAA osteopaths.
Yeah, exactly. So, and these days, I think, there was a yellow pages that turned up at my doorstep the other day, but it was about,
I'm sure
I
there's
think it
people.
was about a centimeter thick,
I'm sure there's people out there going, "Why did he say AAA? What's that got to do with anything?"
Yeah. And I mean, this yellow pages turned up the other day, and I was like, they still publish these things? Are you serious?
Yeah.
So it's really changed in, the advertising, being visible, being out there.
Well, Google's changed a lot.
Yeah.
Social media has changed a lot of the
Yeah.
landscape. AI is
Yeah.
coming into play now, and that will change the next 10, 20 years and then what's coming in after that, who knows?
Yeah.
But I think understanding basic financial skills, basic
Yeah.
understanding of cash flow,
Yeah.
income, expenses, profit, loss,
I
those
think also,
numbers.
tracking your leads and your retention and that sort of thing is
Yeah,
really quite important. Which that's really easy to just kind of fall off the wayside if you don't know. You're just like, well, you know, where are you going to put your advertising if you don't know what's working or not?
yeah,
Um,
100%.
where are these, if you're not retaining, if you don't know whether you're retaining your clients or not as well, um, how do you know, how do you know which holes to plug if you're not tracking where they are?
Yeah, no, you're right. That's a lot of it is about just staying front of mind as well, because
Yeah.
people will come in and out of your professional life, patients.
Yeah.
You may not see them for 2 or 3 years, 5 years even,
Yeah.
and they'll pop back in. I had someone today that I haven't seen in about 4 years,
Yeah.
pop back in. I had someone last week that we hadn't seen in over 14 years,
Yeah.
and if you do the right thing by people and you stay front of mind, eventually when they need you, they'll come back
Yeah. I mean,
to
I had
see
a
you.
client today come in who's, the granddaughter of someone that I used to treat ages ago. And I
Yeah.
haven't seen this, I haven't seen the granddad and and the grandmother for years and years, but she's here comes in the granddaughter for the first time now. Oh, my grandfather said I had to come and see you. Just
Mm.
he was adamant that I come and see you. And I thought, gosh, how old's your granddad now? I haven't
Yeah.
seen him for a long time.
Look, never underestimate those small connections.
Yeah.
And going back to the immigrant barbecues, that's where the word spreads.
Yeah.
The barbecues where people talk about you. I think that's a gold mine for referrals. Anyway, just going in a different direction now.
Yeah.
Well, maybe not too different, but you've gone into the online space.
That's yes,
Um,
getting there, starting to.
yeah, yeah. Tell us what you're doing there and what made you want to do that and what you want to achieve.
Yeah. So I'm creating a 12-week online program for women who around 40 plus with ongoing back and neck pain, who want a holistic solution. So who are they're feeling a bit tired, they're feeling a bit old, they're stiff, they're sore, they just want to get back to enjoying life, sleep better, move better, reduce their pain, and just feel like themselves again. So creating that. So it's a bit of a journey. Basically setting up a whole nother business really, and learning a lot of new skills with that. So what I guess there's a few reasons why I ended up going that way. Really, I mean, a lot of it's about choice and flexibility. So having, earlier on in my career, I guess, moved from place to place and thinking down the track now going, okay, so in 10 years' time, if I want to move town,
What do I
what am I
take
going
with
to do
me?
for work?
Yeah, what do I take with me?
Like like, I don't have a job that I can walk straight into if I move out of the area where
Mm.
I am. So what am I going to be 50 years old starting from scratch again? Unless you buy someone else's practice or something, which is still going to cost you, So there is a little bit of that, but I think after, over 15 years in practice, you're developing different skills, you're broadening skills. I've done some yoga teacher training. Um, I've been doing some other practitioner training where uh, delving into sort of some like inner work that actually helps physical conditions as well. So plus our osteopathy exercises, rehab, stretching sort of stuff. And I just felt like this, I've got all these skills, I've got all this knowledge that I can really offer people. But when they're just coming in for a 40-minute appointment, they're only getting a small part of what I can offer. So how do I use all these skills that I've got and package that together so that I can give the clients the best outcome that I can give them? And I just went, well, I need some kind of avenue where I can put all of this together over a longer period of time, because people might come in for half an hour, 40-minute treatment, whatever it might be, that, whatever your appointment times are, to come in 3 or 4 times, you treat that condition, but you just kind of feel like I haven't given it all that I've got. I'm only offering, I'm reducing my skill set, or reducing myself to just this small little part of but I know so much more, and I can have much more of an impact. And then also the location flexibility, and getting to a point where, being in practice for over 15 years, you just kind of start to want to branch out and start to want to evolve and develop. I think it's natural for us to want to keep, keep digging, keep learning new things, keep growing. And if you just stay, in that same model that you always have, you just don't really feel like you're growing as a person.
Well, I think also that having your experience, you eventually figure out that treatment is a partnership. It's not just
Mm,
you. You might be driving treatment, but
yeah.
ultimately it's a partnership between you and the patient.
Yes.
And I think what you're doing with your online program is you're really tapping into the partnership.
Yeah,
You're
absolutely. Just
yeah,
educating and empowering those
yeah.
clients so that, they can walk away with this skill set, with these tools,
Mm.
and go, now I know how to manage myself in the long term as well.
Yeah,
So
you're
it's
helping
really
them be a
putting
good
a lot of
partner.
the onus back on them. I mean,
Mm.
you're opening the door for them, but they're becoming in more control of their health and their lives and their bodies, because they've got these knowledge and these skills to do so.
Yeah. I think they'll still come and see you then also for the stuff that you need to do, but
Yeah,
you're really helping them be a good partner in terms of treatment.
yeah,
And that's a massive part of what we do, and I don't think we get enough of a chance to do that long term for people. And I think
mm,
your example of going online could be an example to other osteopaths to kind of really, take that and improve their partnership with patients
yeah.
to get better outcomes. And you can reach more people, and I think that's going to
That's
create
the other thing is,
that's going to
there
create
might be people
yeah.
that are seeing, physiotherapists or chiropractors or osteopaths or none of the above, that still can really use this information and still really use those skills.
Mm,
But they don't have to be local either. So you can
mm.
access those people that are a little bit further away that will still really benefit from what we've got to offer, but it doesn't have to be face to face.
And I love that you're really monetizing your thought process. That's what makes us special, and that we deserve to be paid for that. Your thought process as an osteopath is what makes
Mm.
you special as a practitioner,
Yeah.
and you're learning to monetize that because that's it goes to speak to the power of osteopathy. I think that you can take that thought process and really turn it into anything that you want to turn it into, and it still works because the philosophy works.
Yeah. Yeah.
You know, So
Thanks.
that's great. Look, I think that's a good place to end our conversation for the podcast. What I will do though is continue to chat to Kate on the other side of this podcast for my Success in Practice students. So for everybody else, thank you for joining us, and thank you, Kate.
Thank you, Sammy. It's been a pleasure.